Good afternoon. My name is Steve Seitz, and you are here with me. I'm grateful for that. We are here for another episode of Book Talk. And today I have with me my good friend Matt Spencer.
Hey, guys.
Matt's a novelist from Brattleboro, and I have to say I have known Matt for what, ever or not quite forever?
You've known a few incarnations of me, I would say, over the years.
Matt was one of my son's closest friends when Dan was in high school, and that's never left our lives. And as it happens, he and I have drifted into the same stream, which is liking to write and tell stories. And so Matt's here today to tell us a little bit about how he came to start writing and what his current projects are. How did you decide you wanted to write?
Well, basically, I've been, before I even comprehended it as a storytelling practice, I've pretty much been obsessively drawn to the act of storytelling since I was a little kid, playing with Masters of the Universe, Transformers, and, action figure toys that were around when I was a little kid. And except I would be, really pay attention to the cartoons I was watching and be absorbing the storytelling structure and would be, acting out, making up my own complex, for that age of a kid, stories to go with this. And then it all kind of came together. I think I was in the 7th grade, and my English class was given an assignment to write a short story of some kind, and I wrote something about the Frankenstein monster, and then I was like, oh, I like doing this, and it's been kind of ever since,
Mm-hmm. So were any teachers who encouraged you in this?
Yeah, this one particular English teacher in middle school, Christy Craig, was very supportive of my creative endeavors from the start. She actually put me in touch with and encouraged me to attend a summer camp at the University of Virginia for aspiring creative types, at which I met some very close friends who I'm in touch with to this day, who are literally family to me at this point, and I learned a lot there, branching out, discovering new voices and new influences that I would not necessarily have been exposed to in little Bedford, Virginia, which was where I originally grew up.
So you didn't tell me about the UVA connection. Tell me what that camp was like.
Oh, it was great. I mean, there were day classes. It's been so many years since I really thought about it. It was there would be an hour-long class with a writer-in-residence instructor in the mornings, and then in the afternoon there were daily afternoon electives, and then the rest of the time it was pretty much like a teenage summer camp kind of atmosphere, only everyone there was some sort of really driven, creative songwriter, aspiring newspaper journalist, playwright or screenwriter or fiction author, who, and just none of us had been in an environment with, young people of our own stripes before. And that was, a real fresh air, open up, it was like we were learning to give our own consciousnesses permission to be ourselves by interacting comfortably with each other in ways we weren't necessarily finding in our peer groups back home and school and what have you.
Yeah. So, and what about reading? Just about every one of us had 2 or 3 writers looking over our shoulders as we were growing up. Who are yours?
Oh, well, probably, the first 2 novels that I remember reading on my own as a kid were The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux and Salem's Lot by Stephen King.
Oh, excellent choices.
Yes, and those both, really had a, that kind of set the tone for my creative, like what catches in my own creative filter from then on, and that went on to expand to a lot of other contemporary horror and supernatural fiction, and as well as Victorian horror and detective and adventure fiction. And as I got older, my reading preferences expanded outward to include adventure fiction and also film noir and hard-boiled mystery crime fiction. And
well, you're not going to see Philip Marlowe anywhere in books like this.
not really, though. This earlier book I had published.
You can hold it up there. It's okay.
Okay, yeah. About 2 years ago, Cult of the Stars, which was illustrated by my friend Deirdre Burke.
Deirdre's lurking off the set here.
Yep.
But good cover, by the way.
Deirdre gives us a thumbs up, and this book was kind of in very many ways initially inspired by both more Victorian era Gothic horror literature, as well as with more of a sensibility of more of a street level perspective that you'd more find in something that didn't become popular or acceptable in popular fiction until about 40 years later with, great writers like Dashiell Hammett and, as you said, Raymond Chandler.
Just to bring the audience a little bit more into focus here, I read an early draft of this book when Matt was working on it and offered a few suggestions, which I hope made it into the final manuscript.
Many of them did.
Essentially, the story is I would describe it as a paranormal chase through London.
Yeah.
Late 1880s.
Yes, very much so. With kind of a supernatural vigilante detective as the protagonist, who is a stubborn, tenacious bastard, Frederick Hawthorne, who keeps periodically resurfacing in my writing at various stages. And he's kind of like he fronts as a pub owner and is also, like I said, a supernatural vigilante detective. Some readers have described him as a bit like a cross between Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Hyde.
So is this part of a series?
Yes, this is part of a loosely connected series. It's I've written. This is the only completed novel about this character, but he turns up in various other novellas and short stories I've written. One of which is coming out early next year from Damnation Books.
Oh, I didn't know about this project. Tell me about it.
Oh yeah, Chapel of the Falcon, which actually began as a short story that was going to accompany an independent concept album project from another friend of mine, Lady Laudanum is her stage name, and she put out the call for to accompany her concept album, Drink Me. She put out the call for creative storytellers of other mediums like art and like visual art and prose fiction. And I got the prose fiction assignment on what turned into, well, her concept was very Victorian era Edgar Allan Poe sort of Telltale Heart theme. So naturally I started thinking of that in that headspace. Oh, what do you know? Mr. Hawthorne shows up and has something to say about that. And that project kind of fell through, but it was the concepts I was working on with Jessica, aka Lady Laudanum. They did continue to flower into its own thing, which everyone who read it agreed was pretty special and cool in its own right. And about a year later, that got a deal, and I contacted Jessica and said, look, this finally got published, or got an acceptance deal for publication, but I just wanted to say thank you, because I wouldn't have found my way to this story without you, essentially. And she said, she gave me your blessing to go forward with it, and I'm glad that people are now going to finally get to read that story. It kind of cross-cuts between the same era that Call to the Stars takes place in, and an earlier point in history with the witch hunts led by Matthew Hopkins in the 1600s, and
British or American?
British, and some tortured spirits left over from those times are, we find out, have been stuck in this abandoned chapel out in the woods, and that's sort of brewing to the surface, and Hawthorne sort of finds his way into that story within a story, and I don't want to give away too much from there.
Well, it's pretty interesting what you just said a little while ago, that he just sort of showed up. Do your character, do the characters do that to you? Do you find themselves knocking on the door demanding to be heard?
My characters show up and come together in all sorts of different ways. I mean, sometimes they'll start out as, they'll stem from a distilled personification of some mood I'm in at the time, or I'll just see an old photograph of someone, or I'll sometimes just come up with a cool, aesthetic visual image that looks really cool in my head, and of some person, and I'll start describing them and writing what they're doing and get to know them as I go along.
I see. And
sometimes they just take on wills of their own. I mean, I recently had someone tell me how the part of your brain that expresses itself creatively is, on a level, a different personality within your consciousness than your main personality that through which you typically express yourself.
Yeah.
And so definitely all of the different characters that I write are like, they are manifestations of something that is going on somewhere in my consciousness that obviously isn't a defining factor of my own day-to-day identity, often for the best.
Yeah. So I don't take it you're one of those writers who outlines everything down to the last sentence and then sticks to it.
No.
What sort of prep work do you do when you start to write something?
Well,
anything?
Well, if it all really depends. I mean, if it's a historical story or something set in a historical setting, I will have to do as much research as possible.
Yeah.
And sometimes I...
Oops. Keep on going.
Yeah, and sometimes I will find myself... Sometimes I'll write a little bit of an outline or what have you, and something very rough, but it always ends up turning into something completely different by the time I'm done.
I find that out too.
Yeah.
The story you want to write is never the story you finish, is it?
No, and it's funny because sometimes you'll be left with, I'm here with a really cool story now, but I've got all this other stuff I was looking forward to using at some other time, or looking forward to being in this, and now I'm still stuck with it, and a lot of times that'll find its way into another story that I write when I wasn't really expecting it.
So what do you do when you've written yourself into a corner? You've had a really brilliant day, you read it over and realize, I can't use this. What do you do?
Well, sometimes I just will let it sit a while, and sometimes that's by working on writing something else instead for a little bit, or just going out and hanging out with some friends so I can get it out of my mind. And sometimes I'll just, when I come back to it, sometimes that leads to just chopping large blocks of texts, and sometimes, you know, even in the most, oh God, really kind of days, then I'll still find some little nugget that I can cut and paste into something else, and, you know, use, you know, some little nugget of something that's worthwhile, even in the most crap output day, that can coalesce or be the seed that's going to grow into something I can use later on that I wouldn't have found my way to if I hadn't written a day's worth of something I later realized was crap. I mean, it's kind of microcosmic for the rest of life, where, you know, you find yourself to the best things in your life that you wouldn't have been in the time and place there for if you hadn't made some horrible decisions a few paces back of what time and place you wound up in.
Before we started talking, you know, taping the show, you talked a little bit about how you found your current publisher, Damnation Books.
Oh yes.
I think a lot of people, you know, listening in would like to know how you go about getting a publisher.
Well, for me, it's always been a matter of I had an agent for a little while some years back who pretty much turned out to be completely useless, and ever since then I've just looked for publishers, mainly for small press short story magazine sales, and then broadening it up to searching for publishers for novels that I've written, which is to basically these days, you know, I remember the days where you got that big hefty tome of the yearly writer's guide.
The writer's market. Oh,
the writer's market guide.
Still useful.
Yeah. And these days, you know, that's still useful, and so there are more and more online databases for places where you can find a publisher for whatever kind of writing you're looking to sell somewhere. My main resource, how I found Damnation Books, really, I discovered them through Rollin.com.
Better spell that for the audience, please.
Oh, yes. Rollin.com, that is RALAN.com, and it's a database of fiction markets and some poetry markets, and that focuses on paranormal fiction, namely like science fiction, fantasy, horror, what have you, and I basically once I had the full first draft of all three books in the Deschembine trilogy.
This is the first one, by the way.
Yes.
You should hold it up. You were holding it sideways. So.
Oh, yeah. The Night in the Land.
And
from Damnation Books, which you can have, is pretty easily available anywhere. And I basically found Damnation Books by when I was scrolling through cross sections of novel presses that were picking up things in the horror, dark fantasy field, but were also open to old-fashioned swashbuckling fantasy adventure, because this book kind of has a really bizarre sort of blend of the two to it.
Yes, as I found out.
Yes. And their guidelines were basically, they requested that I send them the first three chapters and the last chapter, plus a synopsis of the whole story. And I sent it to them, and within a week they sent me their head editor, Aaron Lale, sent me an email saying, Matt, I'd like to see this complete manuscript. And I sent the complete manuscript with, under the understanding that I'd probably hear back in about a month about whether or not they were going to publish it. I heard back within a week.
Wow.
And I remember the night I got that email, I was hanging out with Deirdre, the artist who you saw her lovely cover image for Call to the Stars. Here it is again. I was hanging out with Deirdre, and she'd left the room, and I checked my inbox on my laptop and saw an acceptance letter saying that they'd like to offer me a contract to this book, and I let out an inhuman sound of glee. Right?
Feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, a few seconds before Deirdre walked back into the room looking very disconcerted and saying, Matt, are you okay? And then, yeah, and like I said, this is the first draft, or this is the first book in the Deschambine trilogy. It's set primarily in my adopted hometown of Brattleboro, Vermont.
Why Brattleboro?
Well, it's just Brattleboro and Vermont in general. It has a very sort of an interesting, quirky sort of, it's got its own quirky community spirit. And the natural surrounding wilderness habitat is just really breathtaking and majestically, naturally beautiful. And the natural rugged environment is very much, not just in Brattleboro, but throughout Vermont in general, in a very unique way, which is one of the reasons I'm so in love with the state, is, very much intertied with the local culture of the identity. And if you're the type of person who your imagination tends to run towards the fantastical or even the ghostly, ominous quality of a really deep, dark forest in the middle of the night, then it's really hard to imagine for me how you could live in Brattleboro or really anywhere else in Vermont and not have your imagination stoked in some sort of gritty fairy tale sort of direction. And I just kind of started, I think what this book, when I first started writing it, what it really coalesced, what I realized early on I was writing was sort of my subverted take on the kind of classic heroic adventure myths, that stories that you normally read that is set in some other world, either like a made-up world or some imaginary historical setting. And I was like, if you took a certain number of archetypal jumping off points and then placed them in a day-to-day realistic setting that's just surreal enough that you can kind of imagine it making that leap, and you develop, it was something closer to verisimilitude, then it becomes a completely different story.
Yeah, well, you captured the harmony lot pretty well, I have to say that.
Oh, excellent, yeah.
Amazingly, we have just flown out our time.
Oh, wow.
It didn't take long at all, and I didn't get to ask half the questions I wanted to.
Oh, well, we'll have to come back and do this again sometime.
Yeah, when the next book comes out, by all means, give me a call.
All right. Well, the next book coming out is actually available online as an ebook as of today, which is called Summer Reaping on the Fields of Nowhere, which is kind of a Southern Gothic noir with sort of a supernatural horror spin to that.